Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the program. For those of you that are not familiar with me, my name is Brian Rothwell, and the whole goal of this program and this presentation is to share with you a 10-year journey. I find it's the classic saying, if you can't help yourself, you can't help other people. So I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the principles and some of the things I went through to get on the other side of a lot of chronic pain. And the specific point that we're going to discuss today is more neck pain, and we'll get into it right away. So we're going to zoom right out, and we're going to take a very global approach to this. And as we get closer to the tail end of the presentation, you'll have more actionable things and some of the things that you will see within the program that I've curated. So this quote here of anything that is deemed complicated and/or sophisticated will live or exist within a minimum of threes. And what that means for us today is to answer the following three questions. What is function? Now, very often in the clinical space and on the gym floor, people use the word, this is functional. And when you ask that person what that really means, they kind of just shrug their shoulders. So for us today, we want to give that an actual definition. And what I've come up to the conclusion of is the common universal human experience, whether you like doing sport, whether you like being in the gym, or you just want to get on the other side of chronic pain, we have to respect the fact that we all walk and we all breathe. It's taken many, many years for us to go from all fours to now standing on 2 feet. And that brings us to our second question, which is what is center of mass? It's basically the management of our skull, our rib cage, and our pelvis against gravity, because we are no longer on all fours. That poses then the third question, is what is reciprocal redistribution? So this is a concept that was confirmed to me through a very brilliant practitioner back home in Canada. Shout out Dr. Wishloff. So the human body wants to always keep our eyes on the horizon, and how we manage these three things, our center of mass, we will do so in order to keep us on the horizon and moving forward. So we have the inevitable forces of gravity that come down on us, and then this thing called posture is how we manage those three things, which I'll kind of allude to in the next couple of slides. So those are our three things we want to discuss: is what is function. In this context today, we're going to talk about breathing, less about walking. What is center of mass? These three things that kind of house our spinal cord, organs, all those good things. And then what is reciprocal redistribution? Is basically how you manage yourself from a postural perspective against gravity. So having variability between these two extremes allows for a reflexive and not a reactive experience. This is just a very fancy way of saying that there's no such thing as a good or bad posture. Like as I'm sitting here talking to you guys, I'm in that classic maybe bad posture where I'm hunched forward, my head is forward. That's going to be in the realms of more extreme 1 versus extreme 2, which I'll kind of show you as I stand up here. So in the clinic, when people come in to see us, is the first thing we should take note of is a lot of times when people are very maybe athletic, you might see a presentation of the rib cage goes forward. In order to keep their eyes on the horizon, for them to not fall forward, their head goes back and their pelvis goes back behind. Kind of like I'm tuning it up a little bit. So those people usually have a lot of lower back stiffness, things like that, because as two of these segments go in one direction, the thing in the middle, the rib cage, is going to go in the opposite. So again, if my rib cage goes forward, my head's going to go back in some way, shape, or form, and my pelvis is going to do a bit of the same. Now, the opposite extreme to that posture is going to be what we typically see people bound to a desk, which is if my rib cage goes back into space, reflexively, my head is going to go forward, and my pelvis is going to tuck underneath me. So again, I really want to emphasize the fact that there is no good or bad posture. These are just two extremes that we typically see. Obviously, there are exceptions to these rules, but for today's purpose, we just want to know that having variability or movement options between these two things is going to help us get on the other side of neck pain. So now that we got all the heavy stuff out of the way, let's talk about the structures in which we need to actually put our focus towards, and the first one being your rib cage. Now, I'll be honest with you, for the first few years of my career, I didn't think anything about the rib cage. We're always talking about hip and shoulder, maybe even talk about the foot a little bit. But again, the rib cage becomes a very important piece of the puzzle because it's basically how our shoulder and our neck move. So I'm going to read it out to you here. It is vital for our rib cage to maintain variability, which kind of just means movement options. And the fact that we all have to breathe, inhale, exhale, over time, whether it's respiratory biases or shapes and sports that we kind of indulge in, your rib cage is going to change shape to kind of adapt to what we need to get done. Some people have a wider rib cage, some people have a more narrow rib cage. And for us, we want to talk about the importance of deliberately getting breath in this part of our rib cage. So kind of anterior chest wall, kind of around your collarbones, essentially. So what do we call this in anatomical terminology is the pump handle. Basically, when you take an inhalation, we should be able to see that this can lift, and you'd be surprised that when we ask people to do that in the clinic, some people can simply not get any type of expansion or movement there. The inability, like it says here, for our chest wall to expand, getting breath around the collarbones, can leave us with a high probability over time to have some type of circulatory or nerve pathway issues, because if those two things are clamped down all the time, we have a tremendous amount of things that run underneath that clavicle or your collarbone that kind of feed the arm and feed the head. So whether you have like TOS symptoms, like kind of like the numbness, tingling sensations, you have tension headaches, vertigo spells, and to kind of talk about where this is personal to me is for a long time, if you know me personally, I would have this twitch where I would turn my head to the left really aggressively, because when I was a young man at 17 years old, I was involved in a car crash where that car crash rolled about 4 or 5 times. In an attempt to save myself, I put my left arm up to the impact cage and I basically stabbed myself with my own clavicle, which I'm going to speak about in the next slide here. And before I dive into this, this is why I do all this. I lived in a tremendous amount of chronic pain for many years, the numbness, the tingling, the twitching, to the point we even thought I had Tourette's at a certain point just to kind of manage these things. And what was infuriating about it is I could do a push-up, I could do a pull-up, I could do all these things, but it immediately caused me pain. And you can do all the rehab you want with the ball and socket of the glenohumeral joint and your rotator cuff exercises, but we weren't really getting to the root cause. So this brings me to the conversation about the shoulder and the shoulder complex, to be more specific. The shoulder complex comprises of 4 subcomponents, not just the ball and socket of the glenohumeral joint. You also have the relationship here of where your collarbone meets your scapula, which is called your AC joint. If you ever had like a shoulder separation, that's usually what that would be defined as. The other one that's usually overlooked is the relationship of your shoulder blade on your rib cage, which again, in fancy terms, is the relationship between a convex and a concave shape. So if the shape of the rib cage can change based off our respiratory biases and the demands we put on our body, we have to respect that and how the shoulder operates, because if we don't look at that, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse, essentially. Now, the last part is kind of personal to me and something, again, I overlooked for a very long time. When you go to school for this shit, they're going to talk about this is where the axial and the appendicular skeleton meet, which essentially means it should be a really stable, structurally sound point of your body. And for me, because of the car crash, I don't have this structural stability. Your SC joint, your sternoclavicular joint, essentially where your sternum meets your clavicle, hence the name. When you look this up on the internet, if you do a little quick Google search right now and look up posterior dislocation of your SC joint, you're going to see a pretty horrific outcome, or sometimes even death, because when that goes backwards, that could cut off many things that kind of give you life. So the joke is I'm kind of living on borrowed time. We didn't know this was apparent for me for almost like 5 years after the car crash. So the twitching, the numbness, the chronic pain, the crying myself to sleep, we just couldn't really figure it out. I personally never went to the hospital because I thought I was invincible as a young man. But after going to school a couple times over in my 20s, we started to realize that if you kind of palpate, which means feel either side of my SC joint from right side to left side, there's a complete difference, and there is no structural stability of this joint. So my clavicle just kind of floats in space. And a lot of people in sport, and if you get like checked or in a car crash, the clavicle usually breaks before your SC joint dislocates, but that wasn't the case for me. So here we are. So the SC joint is frequently forgot about or not discussed enough. However, this is the meeting point, like I mentioned, about your appendicular and your axial skeleton. Basically means this shit's really important for structural stability. Boom. So it's like, okay, Brian, cool. You've said a bunch of shit about the shoulder and the rib cage. I still have neck pain. What do we do now? So this entire program is broken down into 5 categories or 5 sections and things that I found over the years that helped me and my clients get on the other side for chronic neck pain. Now, I'm releasing this program on October 1st, 2025, depending on when you are listening to this. And it's going to be facilitated through the Train Heroic app. Now, the beauty part about this is I know what it's like to try and do rehab exercises in a public gym. It's fucking weird. You don't want to do it. You want to get to kind of the meat and potatoes of your sets and reps. So the only thing you need is 5 things that you can usually find at the house and facilitate it in the privacy of your own home. So a towel, a foam roller, a light band, yoga block, and some wall space is all you need. They're not the most exciting exercises in the world, but again, if you've been living in pain for as long as I have, you'll do anything to get on the other side. So my job today in the latter half of this presentation is actually talking about the actionable things that are going to help you get there. So I'm going to give you basically 1 or 2 examples of each of these 5 categories. So hopefully it sheds some light of what you're getting yourself into. The 5 categories themselves is, again, the breath and how the shape of the rib cage can change and help us. The actual coordination of the spine, which I'm going to give a couple of shots, some stabs towards the yoga community. Reciprocal reaching, so actually improving the movement and variability of your thoracic spine or your rib cage itself. And again, we eventually have to get to some local neck strengthening and the capacity. And the last thing that I think is very overlooked when it comes to neck rehab is the capacity of your triceps. So let's dig into this.
So what that might look like is this guy. So
I'm just going to pause this here for a second. So this is where you have to figure out whether you kind of fit into one of those 2 camps I alluded to at the beginning of the presentation of posture. So this is the one that this is kind of more common when it comes to chronic neck pain, is your rib cage is a little bit caved in. So that means your head has come a little bit forward and your pelvis is tucked under. So this video we're about to watch here kind of puts you in the opposite of those shapes, and it's going to afford you a very easy way to get breath around the front of your chest and your collarbones. You'll notice that I'm lying on top of a rolled up towel or blanket, because what that does is we've taken gravity out of the equation. When I lie on that towel across my shoulder blades, it kind of falsifies or kind of easily props my chest open. And because I'm lying on the ground, my head's going to fall back into space. And I can also keep my knees bent so I can keep a little bit of lower back curvature, so I'm not totally rounded. There's going to be 3 options or 3 potential options of getting space around here, and I'll just kind of let the video play out.
First arm or hand placement is just going to be a low reach, hands by our side. And from a breathing perspective, we're going to take an inhale through the nose, and then an open mouth exhale. During that exhale, try to find a bit of a low level brace and maintain that brace on the initial, so now the following breaths can very easily go upstream. So that's idea number 1. Idea number 2, some people actually like to drive their elbows into the ground and think.
So what I'm referring to here is this concept of when we're trying to get expansion in different parts of the rib cage, and for us today it's around the collarbones, is if I think about contracting some of the muscles in the back of my rib cage or the back of my body, that's going to create a path of least resistance for expansion to happen. So that's why I'm driving my elbows into the ground. So I'm going to have some of my rhomboids and upper back musculature kind of contract. So when I take that inhale, I should feel that expansion happen. So this is kind of option 2 for this idea.
About retracting their shoulder blades, just about 10-20% of effort. And the last one, if you want to try it, probably the hardest one, is going to be doing a passive external rotation. So just let your hands fall behind you. Now, to caution you with this one, if you're really, really limited in your shoulder range of motion, you might feel that this part of your shoulder is going to pop up and it's going to feel like it's excessively pulling. We want this to be gentle. Again, less is more. We're not going to fight tension with tension. So if you have to bolster something underneath the backs of your hands to relax this part of the shoulder, you should probably do so. So we're going to do this for.
So the second and third option, again, whether I'm driving my elbows back into space or I'm letting myself go into some external rotation, either way, that's going to contract some of the tissues in the back of your back, which will then afford you an easier way to get breath up here. And a lot of times people are not aware that they've lost this ability over time. So that would be my recommendation for breath and rib cage shape, and to figure out like, okay, Brian, that's nice, but how do I know this is actually making a change for me? So there's a classic test that we do in the clinic where we kind of take someone's hand and we ask them to put it behind their back. So basically I'm trying to touch the opposite shoulder blade here. Now, a lot of people can accomplish that, but when they do that, they might feel like, oh, Brad, it's kind of like uncomfortable, pinchy, just kind of feels like something's holding on. And after we do about 2 sets of about 10 breath reps, and people retest that hand behind their back, they're like, oh, that feels a lot smoother, just nicer to be back there. So that is basically telling you you've done the most gentle thing possible to create a change around this part of your body. And that's going to restore something we call like internal torque in my world, which is going to be internally rotate the arm, adduction, so adding it to the body, and extending, aka putting it behind you. So if you've lost that range of motion in your shoulder, creating some anterior chest wall expansion through this drill is going to help tremendously. Now, that's one camp of people, right? Where the rib cage has kind of gone back into space and the head has gone forward. There's also another subset of people, especially in the athletic world, that their rib cage is very forward and their head has gone back. So now we have to figure out how we can also create expansion here.
Both of our fists to our.
So like I just mentioned there, taking both of your fists and doing an active reach of your elbow, what they'll call protraction. You should feel or even see that your clavicle is going to go from here, and then because of that angle of your arm, it's going to lift. The second part of that is going to get your shoulder blade to become flush on the rib cage, which is really important when it comes to that convex-concave relationship. That position alone is going to allow you to very easily get breath into here. The second thing you should notice is, what am I doing with my feet? Because in this typical posture, people tend to go into that with anterior tilt, aka we're going to think pelvis goes almost back into space. When I put my heels up on a bench or a couch, that's going to help me tuck back under, so kind of undo the typical thing when this person is standing against gravity. So again, this is option 2 of getting breath around the collarbones, and the same test retest can be had of when I put my hand behind my back, how does that feel? I'm going to try 2 sets of 10 breath reps and then come back to this and see if it's made a change. So let this video kind of play out as well.
Forehead, and we do this very subtle reach of the elbows. When you do that, you'll feel your shoulder blade become flush on your rib cage. That's going to allow the breath from a path of least resistance to go into the chest, but also not into your neck. So if you know you're a neck breather, use something behind the back of the head or the neck. And we're also going to have a support system to take our lower back out of the equation. So all we got to do is lie back as comfortably as we can. We're going to do that very subtle reach of the elbows to the ceiling. And then from here, I'm just going to take a nice inhale through my nose, followed by an open mouth exhale.
So again, what's really important about this, and this usually happens with this presentation and posture, is people, they'll breathe with their neck really aggressively. So when you see the muscles in the neck kind of contract when someone does, like, someone breaks into the house and it's like, oh shit kind of moment, because someone breaks in, you're not doing that, you're trying to, whew, fuck. What we want to do basically is provide some comfort. I'm not really doing it in this video, but instead of putting the pillow against the base of your skull, I would encourage you to put it behind the actual base of your neck, because some people, again, in order to keep their head on the horizon, they have overcorrected their head position, what they'll call military neck sometimes. So if my rib cage has gone forward and I am here, I will kind of like do this, and that person will go, I have great posture. But what they've done there is they've kind of taken the natural curvature out of their C-spine, which has its own set of issues there. So again, putting a pillow underneath your neck, but not actually underneath the base of your skull, could be a fantastic idea for this type of person. So that's the first and probably the least exciting thing we're going to do to get on the other side of neck pain, is creating breath around a certain part of the rib cage, in our case, the clavicles. And that's going to afford us to regain some range of motion and some movement options for that whole complex. So moving on from there.
You set up his heels on a.
Okay, this is where I got to have some friendly shots towards the yoga community. So the cat-cow thing that everyone does, fantastic. You need to be able to move your spine in that regard. But we talked about the very first thing on slide 1, which is what is reciprocal redistribution? It's a cog system. It's essentially when you are standing up against gravity, two things move in one direction as the thing in the middle moves the opposite way. And that's going to be your skull, your rib cage, and your pelvis. So us lying on the ground and putting our heels up on a bench or a couch is going to allow us to experience that cog system. Because unfortunately, I'm not going to show you by getting on the ground here, but when you do a cat-cow, all three of those segments are moving in the same direction. Now, I'm not saying one thing is right or wrong, but when we're trying to restore some coordination of the spine, learn how to distribute the force, we want to respect that this is how the system actually works. So again, I'll let this kind of video play out here. Hopefully you guys can hear it.
Bench, hands on our ribs, and you're gonna look down. Now the whole goal is how far can you look down without lifting our head at any point. So we're literally gonna be dragging our head the entire time. So the start position is to look down, flare your lower back, and just take an inhale into the ribs. As you exhale, we're going to do a couple things. First one's going to be flatten your lower back. Second thing is exhale. Third thing is to look up. Like someone's trying to punch you in the stomach or you're bracing your midline. And you just do a nice reset by again arching the back, looking down, and flaring the ribs. Again, take an inhale into the hands.
So this start position here is what we were alluding to earlier with posture. So I'm basically trying to slightly tuck my chin. So that's my head going back into space. My rib cage has come forward, which is why I'm kind of flaring the ribs where my hands are at. And then I'm letting my pelvis kind of dump forward or go back into space. So that's extreme 1. And then I'm going to use kind of my hamstrings and then my lower abs to teach my pelvis and my midline how to move together as we pair that with the breath. So we're going position 1 as a inhalation and then an exhalation. If you have a ponytail going on or a backwards hat like this, you're gonna have to take it off because you're literally trying to slide your head on the ground. And it's gonna feel really interesting and probably really weird the first time you do it. It's a bit of coordination, a bit of thinking has to be had, but I'm telling you, it'll be worth your time when you do it.
And exhale. If you feel contribution of your hamstrings as you tuck the pelvis underneath, that is a good thing. It's what you want.
Cool. Moving on from there.
This one we just want to go through some
up
movement.
against the wall. Don't fret if you're.
So the conversation of reciprocal reaching, this is something that was introduced to me in recent times that, again, I had a lot of congestion in my upper back all the time and a neck that was always stiff. When that happens, or your rib cage and your, more specifically, your thoracic spine starts to lose movement options, it basically gets stuck in a certain position, your neck starts to take on all of the additional movements, and then the body's going to try to protect itself, aka what we talked about before, not being reflexive, but being reactive. No one has ever come into my office and asked to be like, oh, I need to get like my, again, it's something I'll allude to later on, like my triceps. Everyone's always talking about my upper traps. And whether you want to move like a robot where your head moves with the shoulders, this idea is about trying to get more movement options in different ranges. So I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this. When we can learn how to move the actual spine, and in this case, the thoracic spine, with more movement options, the inevitable forces that a person has to deal with in their day-to-day, whether it's occupational demands or the inevitable forces of gravity, it's going to help the rest of the tissues and the structures take on that load and not just your neck itself. So we're going to look at 2 examples here. The first one is the very first part of the progression. One side of my rib cage is going to compress as the other side is going to expand as we add in this reach. Now, a lot of times people talk about gaining thoracic mobility by lying on a foam roller or doing these like textbook openers, and like they feel good in the moment, but we're kind of just going through the motions. There needs to be a push and a pull happening in some way, shape, or form. Now, these are very baseline concepts. We're doing more of a reach, but eventually when we get into the throes of this, I want to give someone a cable or a push or a pull that is happening, which then feeds this idea even more. But this is where we start.
You set up is heels on
Isometric. This one we just want to go through some movement of the rib cage. We have our forearm flush on the ground, and you can explore either being a little bit closer or a little bit further in the initial position.
Our goal for this one is to allow ourselves to sink down and shrug a little bit. You'll feel a nice stretching sensation on the bottom as the top side is relatively compressed. And then we're going to do the opposite as I press through the floor, reach up and over. Now the opposite has happened where I have expansion on the top and compression on the bottom. And we're just going to cycle through that nice and smooth.
So essentially what I'm trying to say is sometimes your thoracic spine gets stuck. And a lot of people that do a lot of weightlifting and do a lot, and they're like, I don't know, like I'm trying, like I just feel stiff back in there all the time. There are drills to get breath back there, but what we're trying to do is we're going right to the source and trying to regain movement options back there. And that push and pull in these different directions are going to help you facilitate that. So another option is more of like a disassociation. So my head is going to stay still. My hips are going to stay still, and you'll see me in the video here kind of do a bit of this. So when someone walks down the street and we see no movement of their shoulders or maybe excessive movement of their arm swings, that's not fantastic. We want to see a little bit of movement of the rib cage that isn't always going with the rotation of the head, aka moving like Batman. So first step is going to be this guy.
The wall, don't fret if your heel doesn't touch. We don't need it to at all. And something underneath the knees just for some nice comfort. So as you maintain your head, your rib cage, and your pelvis nice and tall, we're going to keep our eyes looking forward and simply exchange the shoulders back and forth here. So what we should be seeing from like a dead-on view is if I'm looking at you guys, my head stays forward and my shoulders are turning, and what we call this reciprocating reach back and forth.
So again, those are your reciprocating reach ideas. This helps distribute the force along the entirety of the spine and not just stuck in the neck, which is really, really important. And depending on certain disciplines that we do, this might start to take away over time. So awesome. The last thing,
Isometric for
or sorry, the second last thing, getting ahead of myself here, is yeah, we actually have to do a little bit of like capacity work for the neck. Yes, we're going to do some stuff that's more forward flexing, but most people need a reference that's back into space in some way, shape, or form. So this is the first progression that you'd see in the program. We lie onto our back, we use a rolled up towel, and we're trying to, again, use some of those extensor muscles to drive back. And again, this is, see it in the program. This should be a lower effort and long duration because we have to keep our head up against gravity all day long. It's a long 24 hours. I mean, mine is going to bed, but you know what I mean? Like I'm not trying to hold my breath and like drive my head back as hard as I can and be like, ooh. I'm trying to just like, okay, I feel something in the base of my skull. See here that I do a little bit of lift off to add in some additional challenge.
Our neck. And the whole goal of this is to drive our head back into space, or in this notion, back into this rolled up towel I have on the ground. So you're going to put that behind the base of your skull. Again, the idea is that you're driving the base of your skull into the ground. Think of like a 5 out of 10 effort without holding the breath. And if that's easy for you, I want you to try to lift your hips up just a little bit off the ground as you drive your elbows into the floor.
And again, like we talked about earlier, the primary focus is head position, which is going back into the towel. The second thing we're doing, again, is if I drive my elbows back into the ground while I'm breathing in this bridge, it's going to afford me to create that indirect expansion around the collarbones.
Now that I'm in position, I simply just want to continue breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. As much as the lower body might be working in your arms, the primary goal is that driving the head back into the towel. We're going to
Cool. So there's a whole series of progressions that we go through in the 6 weeks that afford you to go from taking gravity out of the equation and doing this on the floor and slowly building ourselves up because we have to stand up as human beings. Now, the last thing, I think I'm most excited
about maintaining good hand
is tricep capacity. Now, as a massage therapist, no one has ever walked into my office and requested to work on their triceps. Not once, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So from a functional perspective, we have to give a definition or a true function to our triceps. What do they do for us as a human being? Now that we are no longer on all fours, we've become very intolerant in putting our entire body weight onto our hands. And the tricep is what we call biarticulate tissue. It's a fancy way of saying it helps distribute load over a broad surface area, very similar to the hamstrings in the lower body. So if you live in a high concentration up here all the time, your triceps help you distribute that load to get out of your neck, or for most people, get out of your upper traps. So you can have a therapist, you can have cupping and fucking acupuncture and get a chiropractic adjustment. You're never going to get on the other side of this. Your responsibility and your onus on actually getting on the other side of neck pain is actually gaining capacity through the triceps. And this is not cable tricep extensions. It's a little bit more thought provoking. Now, the rule when it comes to this that I've learned over the years is you have to reach low before you reach high. Because when you show someone that's a little bit too regressed, any type of reaching that's up here, a lot of times they don't know how to not shrug their shoulder. They just have not gained the integrity or the capacity at a low relative reach, which will get you out of your neck. So in the early days of the program, which I'm about to show you with this video on the left, is we're going to reach low, and we have to respect this idea of doing a gas pedal. I talk about this in lower body training and upper body training, but we basically want to pair this idea of pronation, turning our palm over, and learning how to reach everything. These are going to be, again, low effort, but long duration drills, which is basically how we would manage ourselves against gravity all day long. So let me just show you what this looks like.
Turn our hands over, so we're really pressing through the L shape of our hand. Second to that, we're going to maintain the alignment of our wrist and our elbow as we reach through what we call protraction, or just reaching the elbows forward. If you want to make this harder, move away from the blocks. You want to make it easier, move a little bit closer. Most people have to start this with a little bit of upper back flexion, just so we don't end up in a bad position here. So we're going to go full palms on the edge of a box. I'm going to start nice and close to make it easy for me. The number one cue while you're doing this is to gas pedal your fingers down as you maintain the reach. So we're trying not to shrug up into our shoulders. So I'm leaning a little bit forward, start to gas pedal my hands down, and I reach my forearms. I start to shake immediately here. So we're going to hold this either for breath reps or for the allotted time prescribed.
So again, that's an example of reaching low before you reach high. And depending on the contact point of your hands and that first progression, which is literally on day one, it's the entirety of your palm. As we get better and more proficient at this, we basically take less of a base of support. We go from full palm to then a floating palm. So this part of your palm is now off the edge of the box. And that makes it way harder, but we still basically respect the fact that we're trying to gas pedal down. These are qualities that we stop doing. We just, as we become adults, especially in the world of fucking living behind a screen, we stop loading our hands and our wrists. So then all of that inevitable force and tension starts to creep up into the neck. So I spend my entire career trying to get people to learn how to do this stuff. These are qualities that have to be obtained before even talking about a push-up. This next video I'm going to show you here is the closest thing we're going to get to a push-up in the program. And I've shown this to people in the clinic, especially strong people, but that have neck issues. And they're like, Bri, this is so fucking easy. And I go, you need to respect what we're trying to accomplish. There is a complete difference between task completion and the quality of what we're trying to do. Meaning, if you are holding on to a bunch of tension proximally up into your shoulders, up into your neck all the time, you have to deliberately reteach yourself how to distribute that force through the tricep and through the gas pedal, which is going to be this next video I'm going to show you. You have to learn how to deliberately create tension distally, aka in your hands. Our hands have become so unbelievably weak over time as we become more and more convenient and desk bound that this is why this is such a common issue. You're not going to do a single stretch in this program. You're not going to have a reliance on a practitioner. If you own these ideas, you are going to get on the other side of the neck pain. I promise you.
Hand pressure and not letting your elbow go on the outside of your wrist while we go through these tricep extensions. So we're going to go about, say about eye level. Thumbs are facing each other. You want to keep the thumb wide the entire time.
The distance and where you put your feet are going to give you a different type of challenge. So closer is going to be easier, further away is going to be a little bit harder. So what we want to think about is not allowing our shoulders to anchor up into our ears. We're going to keep these guys nice and low, keep this in check the entire time, and we're just going to allow ourselves to have the elbows drop towards the actual wall. Right before the tip of your elbow wants to touch, I'm going to have you press through the hands. And we want to think about building tension through each end of the fingertip and then pressing away. Something that's really common that'll happen is people will lead with their head a lot. I want you to keep your head back and again, really put the pressure through your fingertips and keep that thumb wide the entire time.
You would be shocked the amount of people that cannot do this well, or they're going to do it with some type of compensation, which is usually the head going forward 9 times out of 10. Or second to that, people cannot flex and extend at their elbow without losing full protraction. So what we're trying to do there, which is why we're on the wall and up the floor, aka less gravity in your own body weight, is do you have the strength as you in the capacity of reaching low? Now we're reaching a little bit higher at about 90 degrees. Forget even going overhead just yet. That comes in the latter half of the program. Is do you know how to control your own body weight through a tricep extension, but not losing any protraction or head position in the process, which means you know how to create deliberate tension in the distal extremity, aka your hand. So that's it, guys. Those are the 5 sections, principles that have helped me get on the other side of neck pain. And the 6-week program is basically my 10-year journey concentrated into hopefully a solution for a lot of people. And if it doesn't help anyone, at bare minimum, this is my indirect love letter, and this program is dedicated to my mother after 30 years of nursing. So, Mom, I love you. Hopefully this works for you. And if anyone else gets benefit from this, then so be it. Thank you for your time, guys, and your curiosity. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Instagram is probably the best way to reach me. And hopefully I'll see you guys on the other side. Cheers.